session we're going to have a look at the for do loop. The for do loop is known as fixed iteration, where we do a loop for a fixed amount of time. So in the syntax that I've got shown below, we have for I start equals 1, so we're starting at 1, and while I start is less than I stop, so we could specify I start at 1, and we could actually go into I stop, which could be 10. So while I stop is less than 10, we carry out the operation, and every time we carry out the operation between the start brace and the end brace, every time we complete the end brace, we actually increment I start plus plus, which means increment it by 1. This is known as a step, and we'll change that around a little bit as we go. And so these are the three main areas. We have the for structure, but the three parts we need to be aware of is our starting, our condition until we stop, and how much we actually step up or step down by. So let's have a look at this working. So let's head into our code. Now within our code at the moment, we actually have a event listener from off a button called for do loop, starting with a button called btn start that calls a function called for do loop, which should actually give us a trace statement inside for do loop. So let's run that and make sure that we actually have our program talking to us. And if that's the case, we can move on to the next part. So we can actually see that we're inside our for do loop. We know the function calls calling. What we want to be able to do is take in a start number like 1, and then have a stop number such as 10, and then we want to step up, and we could actually step up in 1s, etc. And then when we click start, we want to see in our trace window say 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. So let's make that happen. So we're going to quickly write some code. So the very first thing we need to do is actually declare some variables. I'm just going to use some global variables. So up at the top here, and we're going to declare var n start, or I'll actually go with I start is of integer, and then we can have var I stop of type integer, and then we can have var I step also as an integer. Okay, we'll place some semicolons after these. Now once we've got this, we need to actually collect the information from our GUI interface. Now I start is actually coming in from txt start, so I start is going to be equal to the parseInt of txt start dot text. So take the text portion of the txt start, turn it into an integer, and place it into our variable. Then what we want to be able to do is trace it out, because you always want to make sure that you're collecting the information first before you're outputting. And let's go and run that before we get any further. No errors so far. So if I put the number 10 in there, hit start, you notice that 10's outputted in our trace window. So we know our function's working and the call's working, so I can continue with this with I stop. And I can use the exact same text here. Just change that to stop, and change the other information to stop. This is another reason for using developer principles and keeping everything consistent. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm just adding some text so I know what I'm looking at. So I start, in this case will be stop. It will actually trace out stop number, and in this case here we're going to trace out start number. So now when I run my program, I should be able to go start at 1, finish at 10, and we can now see start number 1, stop number 10, so we know that we're working correctly. And then the last one, we need to grab step, so we'll just grab the stop one We'll do the last one for step. Okay, so now we should be able to trace this out. We go start 1, stop 10, and step up in ones. And we know we've collected the right data on the way through. So this is the input part of our program. So now once we've done that, we can now process for the for do loop. So once again, we're going to use the same sort of syntax as before. And to do that, we're going to go for bracket. Now we need to distinguish our start position. So in this case here, we're going to let our index, so I start. Now we've already collected the I start from the GUI interface. So we can actually say for index, which we normally can't use, so we'll declare this as a local variable because index is generally used by programs. So we can declare index, I index, and that's going to be of type integer because it's going to be whole numbers. And we can actually say I index is equal to I start. So index is going to be our counter, which is going to change, and that's going to be equal to I start. Now we want index to keep going until it hits a particular Boolean condition. So in this case here, while it is less than and equal to I stop, we want the program to keep going. And then we need to look at the step. So what the step's going to be is I index. Make sure the E's are in there, otherwise we'll get a little error. We need to make increment in I index. So I index is equal to I index plus step. So every time we go through the loop, it'll actually increment it by the step. And then we can actually get it to do something. So in this case, we want to trace what the index is going to be. So I want to trace out what index is going to be. So the first time through, it should actually be what our input would be. So I start, so if we set that to be 1, then it should go from 1. And if we put the stop at 10, it should go 1 up to 10. And then it should step by 1s if we have the step position as 1. So let's have a look at this. So let's start at 1, go through to 10, and we're going to step up in 1s. In our trace window, we can see that we have started with 1 to 10, step up in 1. It's gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's working well. What happens if we step up in 2s? Start. What we see now is we've got 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and no 10. Now that's quite interesting because when you look at this, it's starting at 1 and then goes 3. In our code though, when we look at it, that's exactly what we've told the computer to be. We've told it to start at 1, but every time it loops, it then increments by the step, which in this case is 2. So 1 plus 2 is going to be 3. So the next time through, index is now equal to 3. So we can actually control if it's going to go up by that way. We can also control it by reducing it if we want it to run backwards. So we could actually step down. So if we wanted to, we could actually start at a higher number, and while it's rather than greater than, less than or equal to, we can actually then reduce it. So we could actually go minus. So I index minus I step, and we can actually get this program to count backwards. So we could start at 10, stop at 1, step 1. When we see our program now, it counts down from 10 in 1s all the way down. Now you can also use this index and change how it sort of works as, and test to see if we need to start at 1 or 0, and you could actually test that before you enter the loop to make sure you start at where you want it to start. So this is a quick introduction of for do loop. I hope it's been helpful to show you the 3 different parts of it, which is the start, the stop, and the step, and that you now can introduce a for do loop within your program.